We have arrived. This is Webb Parton, your host, and we welcome you to the Free Range Dogs podcast. This is a place where we stake out a shady spot and talk about all things dog. Find yourself a soft piece of grass, spin a few circles, plop down, rest your feet, and join us in this joyful conversation. This is Webb Parton with Free Range Dogs podcast. We are visiting today with Don Lietzau. He is a gentleman that comes from the north. He spent part of his life up in Alaska, German wirehair person, and he's had some unique experiences that I wanted to explore a bit, just my own curiosity. Don, introduce yourself.
I'm Don Lietzau, Tundra Moor Drothar Kennels, and we've been in Drothars for about 11 years now. And still have a place up in Delta Junction, Alaska. We do a lot of crane hunting and stuff up there. And we decided wintertime isn't so exciting for us in Alaska anymore. We started kind of playing around down here. 30 years ago, I used to hunt down this country in southeast Arizona. And so we kind of gravitated back here. Bought a house. My daughter moved to Tucson, so it all kind of worked out.
Well, you've imported the family. I saw the pups out in the kennel. They're good-looking dogs. Yeah. And you've got a little piece of heaven here.
I kind of like it here. It's been a lot of work, but I like it.
Yeah.
Still a lot of work, but it's coming.
Let's begin with porcupines, because, that is a thing that's a real problem for some folks. And I know people don't think there are porcupines in Arizona. There are. When we were up in Flag one time, I was telling you a story about being up on the park. I don't mean the park as in an entity, a management entity, but just an open piece of grass up on top in high country.
Yep.
Okay. And we would, my wife and I'd go up and we would just spend a month or so up on top in a big park up there and just, set up a chain gang and run dogs every day and just get out of the hot down below. Mm-hmm. And I had 3 setter sisters out and about. And we're out working just some pine areas, and all 3 of them came in. Just a whole catastrophe. But you see porcupines here from time to time. I do know that I get, particularly in Utah, northern Utah, I get a lot of requests. Please come and do porcupine aversion. I say, well, I have snakes. I don't have any porcupines. But you have had that experience of trying to keep your dogs off porcupines.
Yeah. I started doing porcupine aversion training a number of years ago because we had dogs that were getting into porcupines continually and frequently and multiple. And it was like, I got to do something about this. And so we just started doing some porcupine aversion training. In Alaska, you can't legally own a live porcupine. Or maybe I should back up. I think you maybe could, if you want to jump through enough government hoops with permits, you can probably get it accomplished. But we went to a mounted porcupine for the visual, and then we would go with just fresh scent that we got harvested off of a roadkill, or you could hunt them up there. They really weren't regulated at all. But so that's kind of how we got going. And, of course, we're using e-collared aversion training to convince the dog that they need to leave them alone. And it really did work out pretty well. I went from having multiple dogs of my own in porcupines every season to 0. So that's pretty good. Now, down here in southeast Arizona, we don't see a lot of porcupines, but my dogs aren't prone to find porcupines either because they leave them alone. But we did find one with a short hair this last winter and got a few quills picked up on that one, but not too bad. But that's the only one I've seen down here in about 3 years of hunting. So they're not a lot. Or like I say, my dogs just don't find them. They just don't know they're there.
And typically they're up in little palo verde trees, little mesquite trees.
Yeah.
That, we don't have the big conifers here.
Right.
But they'll be up in those tiny little trees off the ground. They probably have to stay there to survive. I mean, this is probably a pretty tough place.
Yeah, the one we got into was in a little ditch that was kind of growed over with a whole bunch of just weeds and brush, and you couldn't even see it. Mm-hmm. But the dogs could see it.
Mm-hmm. And when you would make those introductions and the dogs would come in, was just a visual enough? What were you, the scent cue? Porcupine have a kind of a musk smell to them.
Yeah, they're pretty strong smelling.
Yeah.
And I've actually trained on live porcupines whenever I get the opportunity in Alaska. We would train just in the field impromptu. But I would use the visual. And I would use the scent. You got a scent cone coming off of it. It was always in some kind of grassy, brushy area. But for the most part, it was working off a scent and trying to get that dog to understand that scent was just something that they realize. They realize that they know they just need to leave it alone because they've been trained. And that's probably the biggest issue with your snake avoidance and or the porcupine aversion training is introducing that dog to that particular smell, that particular stimulus for the first time because they've never experienced it. They don't know. And so they have to go look.
Right.
So.
And often the experience with dogs is once a dog develops a taste for porcupine, they go in on every one they see. And so clearly the interaction has some benefit to some dogs because every porcupine they see, they go to war and end up just loaded up.
I've had it go both ways. I've had dogs learn from their first experience to leave them, and I've had dogs that are like that. And I mean, I've had dogs with a whole face and chest full of porcupine quills. You're dealing with that. Here comes Mr. Porky back for second round, and that dog's ready to go to battle again, and they've already got 500 quills in them, but they're going to take them one more time. Yeah. So, yeah, the electric stimuli and the aversion training has really made a difference in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And, of course, with your snake training, you know that because I've been there, done that too, and we just don't find them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you describe how you would set up your introduction then? You would put your mounted porcupine and you would have some sort of scent cue associated with it?
Yeah, I'd have a couple of different scent cues. I would take just a plastic bag and I'd put some of the scent products, the stool, the urine, the anal glands, whatever I had available, and I'd split that up into two different bags. I put one bag next to the porcupine and one bag out and away. So we had a different location where it was just the scent. And so the dog would never see that at all. But the whole point was not necessarily to see the porcupine, although we did do some movement with the porcupine too to see if we could get a reaction out of the dog as well. But, and then working off the scent cone, just working downwind or working crosswind on a scent cone. And when the dog would pick it up. Now, when I'd set up that system or that idea, I always had a couple of flags out. But I always I got an old male. He's not old, he's 7. But he's pretty good at paying attention to what's going on. And I would use him to verify the scent cone, location, whatever. And he'd get about 75 yards from that location, and he would just stop, and he just wouldn't move. And eventually he'd walk away. He just wouldn't go closer. So I knew where we were at on that. So I could always kind of key the other dogs in on that for the most part.
And you think the other dogs were getting something off that male? Off that first dog?
Probably. But they all had to experience it themselves pretty much. It was very rare that a dog would just turn off and leave. But then we were working with hunting dogs all. We didn't do very many pet-type dogs, very many, the little foo-foo things. It was all hunting stuff. And those dogs are pretty prey-driven. And so they smell something new. They got to check it out.
Right. Yeah. How did that follow through to other stuff? Because I know in Alaska, you got porcupines. But you have wolves, too, and that's more and more so is becoming an issue in the lower 48. I just hear horror stories about wolves and bird dog contacts, And
in Alaska, the wolf problem is not a problem because we kill them. We just shoot them. So those wolves have a whole different attitude about people and dogs than they do in, say, western Montana, where they are in Minnesota, where they can't be touched. And so, really didn't have much issue with that. Never really had any problems with the bears either. My dogs are really well. Their obedience is on top, and so I can always call them off. I mean, I had dogs standing on the rail of the boat running up the river, and a bear swimming 3 feet off the side of the boat, and they're just standing there looking at them. And I'm like, you stay in the boat. You have 4 dogs lined up looking at that bear swimming right next to the boat. But bears are pretty much, they're pretty spooky. They take off. They're not going to stand around. And wolves are really the same way. We did have some issues with some coyotes up there, especially around our training ground, that got used to kind of habitualized to dogs and people, and we did take a couple of those out, but never really had anything. Well, I shouldn't say that. I had a couple dogs take off in the woods one day, a couple of boarding dogs, and they came back all muddy and bloody. Not bloody, but muddy, and then one of them a couple weeks later had a festered bite wound on its neck, so I'm pretty sure he probably got into that one coyote. Mm-hmm. But
do you think it's because they are so used to humans being a danger to them? Because here, the coyotes are a real problem. Lions are a problem. But the horror stories I hear, over the years, the retirement communities, mm-hmm. the little tiny dogs, coyotes come over a 6-foot fence. My mother-in-law came over a 5-foot fence, block fence, and killed and partially ate her little dog. Mm-hmm. Just bold as brass, She was had her little dog on a lead. She walked out her front door. She was about 10 yards off of her front door. Coyote came in and grabbed the dog and took off with it. And he was half Jack Russell and half Queensland Heeler. That's a mix, right? Mm-hmm. And so he wasn't going to go willingly, right? And the coyote dropped him at about 30 yards and took off running, right? But it was still, $1,500 vet bill. Man,
traumatic.
Yeah.
Right here where we're at, Southeast Arizona, I don't see that, and I don't really hear too much about it. Although I'm sure, the ranchers' cats and stuff disappear. But our coyotes here are pretty wary, but they get shot. Mm-hmm. They get shot at all the time. But I know my daughter is in Tucson, and when her pup was little, she didn't let it out of her sight, and now he's 85 or 90 pounds, and so she doesn't worry too much anymore. But in her neighborhood, coyotes take dogs and cats on a nightly basis. It just happens all the time. Yeah. And you see coyotes walking down the street and pretty much oblivious to the traffic and people walking around. They just live there.
Mm-hmm. In Alaska, we talked about bears, but I know moose are an issue too. And I had an experience of I was with a friend turkey hunting in northern Utah, and cow moose, kind of stiff-legged, and she'd give you that eye, and she was at a distance, but still, we backed up.
Yeah. We would run into moose when we were training dogs or something like that. That would happen, and they get pretty cheeky, especially in the spring when they're kind of stressed. And although cow moose, when they've got calves, are really tough, and bull moose in the rut can be, but they're not focused on you. They're just kind of focused on being stupid and running around, rutting, and so they're kind of oblivious. My daughter did run into a bull one day with a couple of cows when she was skiing years back, and the bull came after her. Of course, she had the dog with her. Dog, I don't know how much that played into the bull chasing who, but she got a highline pole between her and the moose and kept running around the highline pole until the bull finally walked off. And I went back there the next day, and he was still right there with a couple of cows, and he looked kind of preoccupied, and I didn't really bother him. But they can be tough. Every year somebody's going to get stomped by a moose, and a lot of times it has to do with dogs, but the dogs come running back. They're going to hide behind You.
Okay.
Because you're tough. You're the savior. You get run over, stomped on.
Right.
The dogs can generally get out of the way.
And so the dogs, the moose literally follow the dogs in then.
Yeah, the moose the dog will go up to the moose, bark, 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 bark. Then the moose turns around and takes after the dog, stomping, 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 and the dog comes. One time I had a little place out on the peninsula out there, and I drove up there one day, and there was 13 moose in my yard. I just had a cabin. I could count 13. I don't know how many were there.
Wow.
And I had a little red dog. She's about 30 pounds, and she had a lot of energy and a lot of attitude. So she wanted to get out. So I let her out. And she took after the moose, and she didn't get halfway across the yard. She was coming back, jumped in the pickup door as fast as she could. That cow was right on her tail. But it's just, yeah, you got to think about it. I don't know about moose aversion. I mean, I trained my dogs not to chase moose, but that was that was just kind of trash breaking type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And my dogs pretty much broke on whatever I want to not chase. We break them off of. But, we've caught bobcats, we've caught lions, we've caught, gobs of quail and thousands of cranes and stuff. So, they've got a purpose. But I don't want them chasing the moose. I don't want them running on bears. It's just the way it is.
And so, and for the folks out there, trash breaking is a term. It was coined by houndsmen, and it means that a dog is bred, or the owner's focus is a particular thing. It might be bear, it might be mountain lion, it might be bobcat, and they don't want their hounds chasing deer or other things.
Right.
And so the term is trash breaking. And I describe how you would handle that. You come upon a deer or a moose that your dog is interested in. You see him pick up on it, and he takes off, and then you apply a correction with the collar.
Yeah, and usually it's a high pressure. The scenario would probably be I'm going down the road or walking down the trail, and I see a moose cross the trail a couple 100 yards ahead, and the dog gets up there, picks up the track, and starts following the moose. Now, I can see the moose or I can't, but I can see the dog or I can't, but I know the dog's on the track. Generally, it's in a position where I can see what they're doing. And then I just crank the pressure up on the collar and just lay on the collar until the dog turns around and is actively leaving that track, leaving that animal. And then just carry on. I haven't said a word. I didn't say nothing. It's strictly between the dog and the moose at that point in time. Mm-hmm. There's nothing else. There's no intervention. I don't even break stride.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've done that with antelope, with mustangs, with Hereford cows, whatever. I mean, deer, they're all broke on that.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't chase a deer. No way.
Mm-hmm.
No way.
Yeah, I've seen people do it with rabbits as well.
Yeah.
They don't want their...
Yeah, and I don't do it so much with small game, and I don't do it so much when I don't know what the dog is actually chasing, because I want him to catch that bobcat. I want him to catch, I've had the dogs catch coyotes, so I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
But if I know they're on a rabbit, usually I can just verbally pull them off, but I can use the e-collar if I need to. But, and even then, now with the deer or whatever, if somebody does get a little antsy about it, but a lot of times I'll just wait and watch that happen, because they're probably going to go 40, 50 yards and stop, and then they're going to turn right around and go back to hunt, because they know better.
Yeah, and that's what I found when I was training other people's dogs, is that, there was a point where it's appropriate to make a rabbit introduction. You're
Mm-hmm.
out there working on birds or whatever, you're planting pigeons, and maybe you're crossing over to wild quail, and you see them hit a rabbit scent, and I often found it was best just to let them go a while, and let them learn they couldn't catch it.
Yeah. Well, that happens too. You're not going to intervene with everyone. All of a sudden, you're looking on your GPS and they're 1,000 yards out. Well, something got them out there. They just didn't wander out there on their own.
Yeah.
So what brought them out there, I don't know. But I can usually just wait it out.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't know what's going on, I just kind of wait it out just to see what happens. But, just take it from there.
Right. Yeah. And that's we're blessed now because we have GPSs to look at.
Yeah.
In the old days, they were just gone.
Right.
Yeah.
And you didn't know which direction they even went. Now,
yeah,
the GPS, I mean, as much as I hate them, I love them because they really do help keep track of where you're at. You know, we used to use bells, we'd use beepers, whatever it was. But that young dog, that male I used for the porcupine aversion, when he was a puppy, he was 4.5 months old, 4 months old. And I'd put him out in a swamp up there in Alaska, and he'd just be gone. He's 4 months old. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, and of course, he didn't have a good recall, and I couldn't get him back. And so I finally went to a GPS on him. He's going out 450, 500 yards. Wow. As a 4-month-old pup out there, whatever he was doing, he was just doing it. Wow. So that's pretty impressive. But after that, it was like, yeah, GPS the way to go.
Yeah. And so what do you run these days? You know, the focus of this podcast is free-range dogs. And so it's helping people turn their dogs loose. You know, take the leash off them and cut them loose and let them run and let the dog's job be to come back and focus on the handler, not the handler wondering where the dog went. Right. And we're blessed these days because we got a lot of electronics and toys that we can add into that mix. It makes that a whole lot safer. Describe what sort of gear you hang on a dog when you cut them loose.
Well, I had the Alpha 1, but I didn't like it at all. It was way too techy for me. It was way too visual. I had to sit and look at it too much to switch it, because I'm always running 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 dogs at a time. That's how I hunt. That's the way it is. I mean, you swear I'm a lion hunter out there, but I'm actually out there hunting quail. So I went to the Garmin Pro 550 Plus, which is like the old Pro 500 body on the handheld, but it has the GPS feature at the bottom with the arrow and whatever. You can run 3 dogs off of one handheld, and so I've always got 2 in one hand or 1 in each hand, so I'm running 6 dogs. And I don't have to look at that particular unit. I'm accustomed to it, and I can toggle back and forth without actually looking at where I'm going. I can increase the pressure or decrease the pressure without even looking. But it's kind of based off the old Tritronics Pro 100, Pro 200, that whole series back when. And so I've just been using that for a long time.
And to our listeners out there, Tritronics was a company that was not so long ago bought by Garmin.
Yeah.
And Tritronics was really kind of the foundation company that really made collars popular.
Yeah.
And it was a very simple interface. Many collars now have rheostats. They might have little readouts with the level of stem. The Tritronics unit has 2 buttons. The lower button is low. Upper button is medium. Both buttons at the same time are high. So you don't have to look at anything. You set a rheostat at the top.
Yeah, but that's a click, 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 so you know which way, you know where you're going.
Right. And so if you've had any experience handling dogs wearing electronic gear, you don't even look at it. It's intuitive.
You also got the toggle where you got a black collar, red collar, blue collar. And so I know that, Baylor's got a black collar, and it's the white. I put a piece of white tape on it, so I know it's because I've got 2 collars in my hand. So one is black and white, one is blue and white for a different dog, which is cricket. And I know which one I'm going back and forth to, and I can go all the way back down through those 3 toggles and pick up a dog wherever I'm looking for.
Now, I use 550s, Garmin Pro 550s. And what I did is I swapped out the collar bands, and I actually changed the color of the dots. So I have one unit is a red, black, and blue. And then the other unit is a pink, green, and orange. And they are wearing the appropriate color for the button.
Yep.
And they're also, I have different colored check cords. So if I'm handling a dog at a distance, I just look at the color of the rope, and then I know where I need to be.
Right. Yeah, you're doing that with your snake avoidance stuff.
Right. And you have the benefit if you're working a particular dog that's yours and you know it, and there's a collar that's mandated for that particular dog, and it kind of settles into your brain.
Yeah.
But with me, it's on any given day, it's a whole new cast of characters, So, so I go by rope color more than anything else.
Right.
Yeah. The electronics now are really impressive, and they've really, they've come so far in terms of what we have available now for dogs to use. Right. And just the interfaces are so much easier to live with.
Right.
And we're just getting ready now to switch over. I'm running GPS units, but I just purchased a bunch of little air tags. I'm going to try hanging those on a dog too, and that you don't use a GPS handheld with. As long as you have a cell service, you use your phone.
Okay.
And it literally, it's like you've lost your luggage, and it tells you where you've lost your car, and you want to know where it's at. You just open up the phone, and it tells you exactly where it is on IMAP.
Well, that'd be kind of handy for an old guy.
Yes.
Forget where your car is.
That's right. Well, no, I was impressed because with the new feature now on an iPhone, if I leave, I walk into Costco, and I leave my car somewhere, okay, when I come out, all I have to do is look, and it says your car is, your car was left at, and so I can literally look at that and know exactly how to walk to my car.
What do you do if it says your car is going down I-10 at 97 miles an hour? Now you got a problem.
I had a friend who was he was doing some survey work out in the desert, and he had a Toyota FJ Land Cruiser, the new style Land Cruiser, and he was doing some survey work out in the desert, and he had parked his Land Cruiser out there, and he's out. I don't know if he was photographing or what he was doing, reptile stuff. And he makes a loop, and he's walking back to where he left his vehicle, and he sees a vehicle that's just like his, drive by on the road, on the dirt 2 track, and it's headed out, and he thinks, oh, look at that car, just like mine. He gets to where his vehicle was, and his vehicle was gone. And someone had taken it. Yeah, and they literally drove it. They went backwards over tire strips and ruined the tires and continued to drive. And they were going through I forget how he told me the story. I think they were going through a fast food, with the tires gone. Okay, going through a fast food drive-through thing, and police officer saw it and decided he probably needed to talk with them about what was going on. I don't know if he had been able to get out and actually even report it to that point, because he had to walk out.
Because he's walking out.
Yeah. Well, we live in a new time. It's a different world.
Yeah, it's something to definitely think about.
Yeah.
Definitely think about. I mean, even when I'm parked way out in the middle of no place, I lock it up. Mm-hmm. It's just like I lock it up. And there's always a jug of water there and an open dish of water. So if you're really that thirsty for water, you can get some water. But I'd rather if you didn't bust into my truck. But I guess if you do, you do.
Right. What we would do for years is you only go in with one gun, and you leave the case open. Yeah. And you leave a jug of water on the tailgate, and maybe some food or whatever. And someone needs to open it. The door's openable,
Yeah. Well, yeah. If they know it's open. Yeah. If they break the window first. That's happened. It happened to my brother.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to talk about, which is a real issue, and it's really everywhere, is steel traps. Dogs getting into steel traps. And I know you had done some education stuff around that.
Yeah, we did. Kind of a lot of PR stuff with the trapping groups up in Alaska and the dog groups. I mean, it's a constant battle. The trappers want the dogs on leashes or off the field for 11 months out of the year. And the dog owners, handlers, walkers want to be able to, use this trail and that trail. And, so it's always a battle, because dog walking or hunters with dogs have just as much right as the trappers do to the use of the land. And so kind of took the premise that way that, we need to educate each other and get along, because we probably won't do well if we try and eliminate one or the other. The trappers do a valuable goal for us as hunters, because they leave more rabbits and more grouse and whatever in the woods for us to hunt. But it is a problem, and we've had some issues where dogs have been killed by conibear type traps, big killer type traps, and or get into snares. I had a young dog get into a snare one time, had a GPS collar on it, and we were out doing some training on snowshoe rabbits. And so we were down in this creek bottom, and the young pup was out there chasing around. And then he just stopped chasing around, and he wasn't coming back. And I couldn't get him to come back. And I could see on the GPS he was only like 43 yards away. And he wasn't coming back. So my first thought was, well, he's got a rabbit under a log, and he's trying to get it out. He's just a pup. He's probably 6 months old. And then finally, he wouldn't come. I tried to give him a little e-collar stimulation. He wouldn't come. And I finally walked in there, and it was just thick as hair on a dog. And got back in there, and there's this big giant bone pile and just snares hanging everywhere. It was a big wolf snare set up. And so this pup was stuck in a wolf snare, just sitting next to this tree, and he was just sitting there waiting on me. He wasn't pulling or nothing, but he was trained not to pull on a chain. He'd been on a chain gang and whatnot since he was a puppy. So I just unhooked the snare, hung it up in the tree, walked him out of there between all the rest of the snares, and we went about our business. I talked to the trapper a month later probably, and yeah, he said he's had that bait station down there for a number of years, and you could see that. But so anyway, we would get together and get some of the dog groups and some of the walking groups in Alaska, and we would just advertise, and we'd get together probably in my yard, and mainly teaching people how to handle traps that they find, handle traps that are stuck on a dog, how to dismantle a snare, how to open up a 330 conibear. Because if I'm a trapper, I've got tools to do that. But if I'm a dog walker, what's my tools? I don't have any. A Leatherman ain't going to cut it. But you do have a belt. You do have a leash, probably, even if it's or a piece of rope, and you can get a 330 conibear collapsed down and off of a dog in about, probably less than a minute if you know what you're doing and you've had some practice. So we would let people practice on that stuff, looking at big wolf traps and looking at smaller marten traps and setting those and offsetting them and all that. So it was just kind of education there, and also kind of goodwill for the trappers. I'd start out with the whole seminar was, we're not here to bash trappers. If you think I'm here to outlaw trapping in Alaska, you can leave right now, because that's not what we're doing here. We're learning how to get along. And we also touched base a lot on thinking like a trapper, moving in the woods like a trapper. Why? Looking for the signs, not the trap, but looking for the signs that someone has been there previously. And you'd see that all the time. And, when you got 3 feet of snow, it's pretty easy to see, or even 2 inches of snow, it's pretty easy to see tracks. So you pull off the highway and you stop your car in a nice little pull-off. Well, okay, this is a nice little pull-off. I wonder if anybody else has ever thought this was a nice little pull-off. And there's the creek there and whatever. And yeah, you see some tire tracks there. You see somebody had gotten out. Maybe a couple guys got out. They walked off down the trail and they went off into the woods. Well, there's only about 2 reasons why you'd walk down that trail and go off in the woods in the wintertime in Alaska. One is there ain't no restroom. 2, there's a trapper. And you go poking around, you're going to find his traps. And then you can make an educated choice as to whether if you want to leave that area alone and leave or not. Tampering with the traps, not an issue, something you can do legally. So just getting people aware that they're not the only person in the world that's out there on that little back trail, and what to do, what to look for, and just making them aware. I think that's a big deal.
And again, for our listeners, we're talking about different types of traps. Folks think of a classic leg hold steel trap, right, which an animal puts their foot in and closes around and hangs on. But there is an additional type of trap called a conibear, which it looks like a square butterfly, maybe, that it lays flat, and when it collapses, it comes down and it puts pressure on the ribs of the... Or
it catches them in the head, or head to head, shoulder area, right, neck.
Yeah, and so it literally grabs them. It's not holding on to paw. It's
and the whole animal,
right? And it's
depending on the size of the animal, will grab the whole animal.
And it's a killing trap. It's not it's not one that just holds the animal there until the trapper arrives.
I was out ptarmigan hunting one day, and I came down a trail that was right off the main highway. And I was no more than 60 yards maybe from an outhouse in a parking area. And I came down, I was on a machine, and there was a couple of people up in the woods right there, and they were flagging me down, hollering, something about a trap, something about a dog. And I said, if that's not your trap, you need to leave it alone. We were yelling back and forth. And I finally realized that their dog had gotten into a 330 conibear. And it was a wolf and lynx set up, so it was on dry ground, and it was a little cubby, and they put some beaver meat back in there, and they put this 12-inch square trap in front of it, and it's got two big, huge springs that are big enough to break your hand when you stick your hand in there. And so once I realized that was going on, then I got up there, and yes, this dog was caught squarely. One of the sets of jaws hit it right behind the head, so it broke its neck. But he said that the dog was initially alive, but not very long, I'm sure. But I didn't have a rope. I didn't have anything, and I'm like, do you have a rope? Do you have a leash? Do you have it? They didn't have nothing. And I realized, I got a belt. And so I run that belt through those loops on the spring. And he was a pretty smart little 15-year-old kid. There's a latch that you can hold the spring collapsed. And so I was pulling with both hands on the belt to get the spring collapsed, and he got the latch hooked. So now I can release that belt, and the spring would stay closed and take pressure off. And so jumped to the next spring and collapsed that one too, and got it off the dog, but the dog was already gone. And that's just a tough deal. And whose fault was it? Nobody, really. But why would someone set a killer-type trap 60 yards from a public outhouse on a well-used trail? And it was just a bad choice of trap location and a bad choice of trap at that location. If it would have been a leg hold trap, it wouldn't have been a problem. Maybe it would have broke a toe, but probably not. It would have probably just pinched down on the dog. The dog would have cried a little bit. It went up, take the trap off the foot, and away you go about your business. But that particular trap's scary. And there's another one also, they call it a cam snare, that it's got a big spring. It's about 3 feet long, and it runs a snare down tight. So it works kind of the same way. And that's another scary one for me. I don't worry about the leg hold traps. I don't even worry about small snares and stuff. My dogs are good with, being choked on the neck. They're okay because they're used to being tied up and whatever. But those killer traps kind of change the whole mood of everything. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be used, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but sometimes I almost think I should change my attitude.
Yeah. I'm sure that 15-year-old boy was he'll remember that the rest of his life.
Yeah. We still, I still correspond occasionally with his dad, who's a big shot lawyer in Anchorage. And he's come to a couple of our trapping seminar stuff where he learned how to deal with traps and stuff. But that was an ugly situation. It was the little boy and his mom, and they took a dead dog home. So it happens.
Well, and that far north, you are using bigger traps. Here, lower 48, it probably is not that much of a problem. I know that one of the issues that, and not so much, since Nixon administration is when it started, when they outlawed 1080, but strychnine guns, 1080 bait stations. For a long time, there was a lot of poisons that were used.
Right.
And when I was guiding, every once in a while, I'd hit a gate, and it would say 1080 beyond this gate, or strychnine beyond, coyote getters beyond this gate. What are the MP40s beyond this gate?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not real familiar with those, but I know that they were used, and I think they're still in use some places on private land. I think they still can use them.
Well, and it's a 38 shell that doesn't have a bullet in it. It has a chunk of strychnine in it. And it's just set on the spring, and a little arm comes up and you put some sort of bait on it. So that when an animal comes in and goes to grab it or bump it with their nose, it shoots this chunk of strychnine into their mouth.
Right.
And it's pretty quick.
Yeah.
Pretty quick. Yeah.
I've had people tell me they're just basically laying right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And the danger is that some person walking by and kicks it and, gets it in a leg or something.
Yeah. I still believe they're in use to some degree in some areas.
Yeah. And I know there's been a lot of political stuff wrapped around the use of traps and predator control and those sorts of things. State of Arizona now, you cannot use traps on state-owned land. It has to be private land.
Right.
Trappers can still trap here, but they has to be on private land.
Well, they can use box traps.
Yeah, exactly.
Box traps on state land.
Yeah.
And so, they catch a lot of cats and fox and stuff like that.
Right. That would be like a have-a-heart releasable. The animal goes into a...
Yeah, they're just in a wire box.
Yeah.
You can release them or dispatch them.
Yeah. But bringing that back to dogs, then there's no way to really... You can't set up an aversion for a dog on that sort of thing. And literally a lot of depending on how they set that trap, a lot of the scent cues and bait cues that they use are really appealing to a dog.
Right.
Yeah.
There's certain scents that trappers typically use, the anise and the skunk scent and that sort of stuff. And I've always kind of played around with that a little bit, thought about it, but I've never really got into trying to do any kind of aversion. I guess I haven't really had much problem with it because my dogs are busy hunting and they don't spend a lot of time checking out that stuff. I don't believe I've ever had a dog in a leg hole trap. I can't remember one. Just that one snare that one time. But they're kind of just off and running. But I could definitely see where if you had a coon in a trap or you had a coyote in a trap, why wouldn't the dog get involved with that? That's pretty interesting stuff. But I don't know. It's kind of, we're here, they're here. We got to figure out how to work around each other a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the other animal that I get requests for are skunks. And that can be a real problem. And, of course, nobody dies, but you kind of wish you'd die.
I think that Webb should probably keep a couple of skunks and do some aversion training with skunks.
Well, you could. You could. Yeah.
You could.
Because when we lived in Southern California as a kid, man, you couldn't hardly take a walk without a dog getting into a skunk, and you'd have to catch them and, get them off. But I can remember vividly, you're driving home and the dog's in the back of the truck and you get them home at the house and you set them up outside on the patio and that smell still comes through the walls.
Oh, yeah. It stays with you for a week or more. Yeah, I had a dog get into a skunk up here on the hill just behind the house here last fall. And boy, she really got it bad. She had that skunk by the butt, and she was shaking that thing by the butt, and she was just swallowing it. It was her breath for 3 weeks. You could smell that skunk. But when she finally, I had my one male. He come up and he grabbed the skunk by the head, took it from her, snapped its neck, and that was the end of the story. That part of the story. But the rest of the story was the peroxide and the baking soda and the Dawn dish soap. And when we got all said and done, a dark brown dog was very, very bleach blonde. Yeah. And she's still pretty bleach blonde. But she was throwing up. She spent 2 nights in the outdoor kennel. She was throwing up. She was just running diarrhea. But when she left that skunk, she headed for the truck, and she went right by the truck. I think she was totally blinded by it even, But, I mean, she lived through it, and we all got around through it. But it's kind of a funny story now, but it wasn't so funny then.
And what worked? What could you use to cut that smell?
Well,
I didn't find anything that really worked effectively.
Yeah,
orange juice.
We used hydrogen peroxide and baking soda and Dawn dish soap, and just make a slurry of that. Wet your dog down, and then just lather him up. Let it sit for 20 minutes. Rinse it off. But she had gotten it so bad, And it was so much internally. She ended up getting 3 doses of that before you could tolerate having her around. But even at that, and then, of course, their collar is pretty well shot. Their GPS collar is full of it, too. So for months, I mean, even now, I had my little Toyota pickup up on the hill, and every once in a while when it gets wet or something back there, I can still smell that skunk smell. And that's months and months ago. So it's still there.
Yeah.
But no carpet, thankfully.
Well, it is impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for visiting today. These are things that most folks don't have much experience with, but some of it was pretty common. Things like skunks and such.
Right.
Yeah. And there's still a lot to be learned, because I'm sure that you could successfully train against porcupines and could successfully train against skunks.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You just got to decide you want to do it.
Yeah.
The porcupine thing was pretty easy. But like I say, nobody ever died from a skunk. And I don't know very many people that actually take their dog to a vet when they get into a skunk. Where you get into a porcupine, I mean, it's going to cost you $400 or $500. Because they're going to have to put that dog out, and they're going to be down their throat and their nose and everywhere else. I mean, my dogs are trained to the point where I can just say, hey, open your mouth, and I'm down there, they're sitting on the tailgate. But not all dogs are quite that cooperative. I've been around dogs that definitely were not and had to be put down just to be able to handle that. But, it's a different world. You're not likely to kill your dog with a porcupine, although they do. If they migrate into the heart or lungs or whatever, it can still kill them. But it's down road usually, not immediately. Not like a snake where you have more issues with that. People have a lot of aversion against snakes, especially too. So It's scary for everybody.
Right. And the one thing we haven't covered is toads. And you will have toads here. You're right in kind of the...
I haven't seen any toads, but there was, I think it must have been a bullfrog the other day up on Roper Lake because I could hear him croaking, but it could have been a toad. But I know my vet talks about toads here, and she says, yeah, they're definitely here. I just have not seen any, but we don't have any water right here. We don't need a lot of water, but, we're not that far from San Pedro.
Well, they live right on the open dirt. And they don't come out until the monsoon.
Got it.
So when you get a heavy saturating 2 or 3 rains, up they come. And they spend the rest of their time in the dirt, cocooned in just rock hard mud. And it will rain, and you'll go out during a monsoon, and it's typically just after dark, You shine a light, and might be a dozen of them hopping around.
Okay.
Yeah. And so January through early October. That's the window. Maybe as early as late June, maybe. But you will have toads here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she says that they're here.
Yeah.
And I actually had somebody that asked me the other day about doing a version for toads. And yeah, I could see where that would work out pretty easily, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do, and I'm referring to Colorado river toads or Sonoran desert toads. It's a type of, it's a large toad, has a gland right behind the eye. It looks like a long welt, and they release a toxin through that gland. Bufo, it's the same toad, the same family of toads in Hawaii, the Bufo marinus, I believe it is. Okay. And the toads in Australia now, they're killing everything. That same family of toad that has a poisonous toxin that they release, so that when an animal comes and puts its mouth on it, it goes to the mucous membrane.
Right.
And it's a horrible death. You can, if you go on my website, there's a page on how to handle that if your dog gets into a toad.
Okay.
There's nothing that a vet can do for you.
Yeah.
That you can't do for yourself. And by the time you get the dog to the vet, it's already too late. You got about 15 minutes. You just use a hose, source of water, could be a shower, thing, or any source of water. Lay the dog down. What'll happen is the dog will come in. You'll see them disoriented.
Yeah.
You look at their eyes and they're just black. They're so dilated. They'll get very wobbly. They'll fall over. They'll lose control of their bladder. And shortly thereafter, depending on how bad the envenomation or the contact is, shortly thereafter they'll go into convulsions. And they'll just convulse until they die. So if you can get that dog, even if they've fallen over, if you can get to them before the convulsions start, and you just run water in their mouth, not down their mouth, but from the top out, and then use your fingers and go in and rub your thumbs, rub the roof of their mouth, their tongue, the insides of their gums, anywhere where that slime has got stuck. Sure. You want the water in there, and you just break it down with your hands and then flush it out with the water. And don't stop. It might take 20 minutes. You might be at it half an hour, but eventually the dog will come out of it. Okay. But you keep going and you keep going until they start to come back. All right. If a dog gets into a toad and you try and drive to a vet,
you're going to lose that time,
Yeah.
Is that mostly a nocturnal thing? Or,
yeah,
or are they out in the daytime?
Rarely in the daytime. You might see them in a pond, or a drainage with water. But mostly it's after dark, and it'll be under lights, like around the house here, where you have outdoor landscaping lights. Anything that draws insects.
Yep, that would make sense.
And they'll get up underneath of it, and it's just French fries falling out of the light fixture.
Sure.
The bugs go up in there, they get cooked, they fall to the ground.
Sure.
Toads come in and take them. Yeah.
Yep. Well, we haven't seen them here yet,
but
that doesn't mean they aren't here. We just haven't crossed.
I guarantee they're looking at your country. This is their place.
Yeah.
This flat rolling grassland.
I know it's amazing how much stuff comes up out of the ground when it starts getting wet. It's just crazy.
Right. Well, we've had a pretty broad conversation.
I'd say
we've covered all the calamities.
I would say,
or many of them. Yeah. I want to thank you for spending the time to talk with us today.
No problem.
Okay.
Welcome.
Okay. Thank you. And to our folks out there, it can be a little bit concerning, but if you get yourself armed with information and you take the steps you need to know what to do in case you have to do something, you can get your dog out there and get them running and let them enjoy their time out as much as you do on that walk you want to take with your dog. So just let us know how we can help. I do aversion work, snakes, and then I think I'm going to be forced into doing a couple toad classes here in July. But there is stuff you can do. You just need to be well armed with the intelligence to know how to take care of it. With that, we're going to sign off. This is Webb Parton, wishing you a great day for you and your dog to go out, spend some time in the great outdoors. Take care.
If you liked this episode, I invite you to visit our website, freerangedogs.com. It's where you can find the stuff you need to live the free-range dog lifestyle. I want to help you with that. Book a consultation call or an in-person training, attend one of our ongoing events, or join our online membership program. We got it all on freerangedogs.com. All right, it's time to head back to the truck and the water bucket for the thirsty dogs. This is Webb Parton signing off, wishing you the boundless joy that comes when you share the outdoors with your best friend.